Baik, selamat datang Bapak Ibu peserta kuliah umum. 2 menit lagi kita akan mulai kuliah umum. Untuk itu, demi kelancaran kegiatan, mohon Bapak Ibu peserta webinar untuk mematikan mikrofonnya sehingga bisa berjalan dengan kondusif. Kemudian bila Bapak Ibu ingin mengajukan pertanyaan, dapat mengajukan dalam bahasa Inggris atau bahasa Indonesia. Nanti silakan diketik di chat box dan saya akan bacakan untuk pemateri kita, Profesor Keriens yang sudah bergabung bersama kita. Kali di YouTube juga buat Bapak Ibu yang ingin bertanya silahkan diketik. Ada operator yang akan mengecek pertanyaan yang ada di YouTube. Saat ini kita masih menunggu Bapak Dekan untuk membuka kegiatan. Mohon bersabar ya Bapak Ibu. Dan kalau dalam kegiatan Bapak Ibu tidak bisa masuk lagi ke Zoom bila jaringannya kurang baik, maka langsung bergabung di YouTube saja Bapak Ibu ya, karena kapasitas Zoom kami terbatas. Sekian, terima kasih. Excuse me, Professor Kerian, we are still waiting for the Dean. We are calling him right now, so sorry for making you wait.
Okay.
Baik, Bapak Ibu peserta kuliah umum, bagi yang belum bisa bergabung, silakan bergabung di YouTube. Begitupun para peserta yang ada di YouTube, tidak perlu khawatir, sertifikat akan diberikan pada yang bergabung di YouTube juga. Jadi mohon untuk menyaksikan dengan seksama. Saat ini kami masih menunggu Bapak Dekan untuk bergabung, jadi mohon kesabarannya ya Bapak Ibu. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and all the participants, today we are going to start our public lecture for today meeting. So please pay attention. Baik, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. The Honorable of the Dean of Faculty of Education, Dr. Arwil Dayanto, MPD, the Honorable of Vice Dean of Faculty of Education, the Honorable of the Head of Study Programs of Faculty of Education, the Honorable of all lecturers and students of Faculty of Education. Welcome to the public lecture of Faculty of Education, State University of Gorontalo, entitled Child Protection and Safeguarding, What Does the Evidence Say? It's a great honor for me, Wodeti Hardianti, to welcome each and every one of you in this special event. I want to inform you that during this event, please turn off your microphone. And if you have a question, you can write it in English or in Bahasa Indonesia, and I will just read for the keynote speaker. First of all, let us thank God, the Almighty, who has given His grace and guidance so that the event can be held this morning. Today, we would like to express our sincere gratitude and a very warm welcome to our honorable guest lecturer, Professor Kerian Walls, PhD, from Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane, Australia. How are you, Professor Kerian?
Thank you. I'm very well, and it's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you so much for being here. I also would like to inform you that this public lecture can be accessed through a Zoom meeting and our YouTube channel, Pedagogika FIP UNG. And for your information, so far we have 400 participants who registered. So thank you for all the participants. To begin with, opening speech. It is now my pleasure to invite the Dean of Faculty of Education that will be replaced by Vice Dean Ibu Dr. Pupung Puspardini to deliver an opening remark and also to officially open the public lecture of Faculty of Education 2022. Please, time is your ma'am.
Thank you very much, Eti.
Sorry. Thank you very much for the time. Thank you very much for Professor Carrie-Ann Weish, PhD, for your time, for your great topic for this day about the children safetyness, and it's very, very important, especially for us in pandemic of COVID-19, because they learn by online, so they must have some protection about the online site, about YouTube or maybe some another online site. And for this time, this is the general lecturer for all of the students in Faculty of Education of Gorontalo State University. And in this faculty, we have 5 departments. There are guidance and counseling and non-formal education, and then the educational management, and then elementary school of education and teacher department, and early childhood education department. So our subject is also children. The student is between 0 to 17 years old children, and so we need the great best practice and also the great information about the safetyness, about the protection, so we can make the best future for children's lives in next generation. So thank you very much once again for Professor Carrie-Ann, and I hope this is not just only the general lecture, but we can have another collaboration, another activities like research, or maybe write some collaboration article for a journal or something like that. And I hope we can do the collaboration together in joint research or something like that. Thank you very much. And I hope this topic will make a new paradigm, and student can open their mind about the technology protection for children. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you all for the very warm welcome. I'm really honored to be here to talk with so many of you. And thank you for making the time for this important topic.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to share my screen now. I hope that's okay. And
okay. Professor Carrie-Ann, maybe I want to introduce you first to our
okay.
audience.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, because you have wonderful career journey, so I want to let them know about what your interest and things like that.
Sure.
And also thank you for our Vice Dean for the inspiring words. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest and speaker for today's event. By reading a brief background about Professor Carrie-Ann Weish, a PhD from Queensland University of Technology, Australia. So Professor Carrie-Ann is a professor from School of Early Childhood and Inclusive Education, Faculty of Creative Industry, Education and Social Justice from QUT. She is also a research ethics and integrity advisor, and her expertise are in child protection, safeguarding, and online safety, and also in systematic reviewing. So Professor Carrie-Ann conduct research in the interdisciplinary field of child maltreatment prevention, and has researched and published in the area of online safety, child safe organization, school-based child sexual abuse prevention programs, child protection policy, and professional reporting of child abuse and neglect. And also Professor Karian conducted her Bachelor of Education study from University of Queensland in Australia in 1995, and also finished her PhD, Doctor of Philosophy from Queensland University of Technology in 2002. And I would like to read some of her publication. In 2020, she published a journal article entitled Education for the Prevention of Child Sexual Abuse in the Early Years, and also Best Practice Framework for Online Safety Education, and also Sexual Abuse Prevention Education in Australian Primary Schools, a national survey of programs. And also Professor Karian conduct an online learning in Future Learn. If you follow, I did take the course and it was wonderful, and I'm so grateful to take that course. And well, without further ado, it is time to welcome Professor Karian Wells to deliver the presentation. Please, time is your professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Etty. It's a pleasure. And some of you may know that Etty was one of my wonderful students when she came to study in Australia in our program here. And it was a delight to work with her in that capacity. So I will share my screen now and we'll get going. I hope you can all see that.
Yes, Professor. Yes, we can see it.
Right. So we begin in Australia, as is our custom, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which our university stands. We pay respect to elders' laws, customs and creation spirits, and we recognise that the lands on which QUT stands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. Today, I'm going to cover some terminology. I'm going to talk about how large is this problem of child abuse and neglect. And then I'm going to focus on what we can do, because there is much that we can do as teachers to prevent, to recognise, to report and respond to abuse. So in the terminology, when I talk about child abuse and neglect, I mean one of 5 different types of harm to children: physical abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and exposure to family violence. And these 5 subtypes come under the umbrella of child abuse and neglect. Another word or another term that's often used is child maltreatment, to mean the same thing, or you might be more familiar in Indonesia with violence against children as the term. Adverse childhood experiences is yet another term that has been used. On the other hand, there is a movement called child protection and safeguarding. So child protection is about making the world a safe place for children. And we do that as adults by taking measures to stand as a barrier between children and harm. Child safeguarding is about making the places where we work safer for children. It refers to the things like policies and procedures and practices that are implemented by us, but designed by organisations to help make the world a safer place for children. When we are, as teachers, when we are working out what we need to do to address a problem, it's always a helpful starting point to understand how big that problem is or how necessary it is for us to do something about it. One of the key studies that was done in 2006 was the United Nations Secretary General's report on violence against children. And data were collected for that study from every country in the world, including Indonesia and including Australia. That data showed that there was violence against children that happened in their homes, in their schools, in their workplaces. And then subsequently, many different countries enabled data collection from their own populations. And researchers have taken a look at all that data collected across the world and joined it together to understand the scope of the problem at a worldwide level. So for emotional and psychological abuse, in many of the studies conducted in both developed and developing countries, approximately 36% of children say that they have been emotionally or psychologically abused at some time in their childhood between 0 and 18. So that's over a third of children that are saying in studies that they experienced some emotional or psychological abuse. For physical abuse, approximately 23%, 22.6% of children say that they experienced some type of physical abuse as children, whether that's through parents hitting, burning, biting, or strangling those children. So a fifth to a quarter, almost a quarter of children say they experience some kind of physical abuse during their childhood. For sexual abuse, fortunately, it's much less. So approximately around about 3%, 2.7% of children say they have experienced that in childhood. Neglect has been very difficult for researchers to really pinpoint with accuracy how common it is, because it's very difficult with neglect to separate the effects of neglect from the effects of poverty, although not all parents who are living in poverty will neglect their children. Exposure to family violence is another big problem for children, and in the range of somewhere between 20 to 40% of children say that they've witnessed violence between their parents or between their siblings and their parents. So there are a lot of children all around the world in many countries who experience physical, emotional or psychological sexual abuse, neglect, and exposure to family violence. And violence against children has lots of consequences for the children and for the children as they progress through childhood, and it continues on into adults. The effects continue into adulthood. And you can see some of those on the screen. So for children, immediately there can be injuries to their physical body. And as they get older then, things like drug and alcohol misuse, sexual risk-taking, the risk of HIV, the risk of unsafe sexual practices, and other health conditions, even things like cancers and diabetes, chronic lung disease, obesity, have all been found to be more common in adults who experienced child abuse and neglect as in their childhoods. So what can we do to address this problem? I think there are many things that we can do, and we're going to go deeply now into 5 of the ways that I think we can help. One of the ways we can help is to prevent it happening in the first place. As teachers, we are in an ideal position to do this. We can recognise child abuse and neglect, we can report it, we can respond to the children every day in our classrooms, offering them a secure and stable place to learn. And we can also work with other professionals who can work in different ways with these children to have a team to support them together. So I'm going to go into each one of those now in depth. So what can we do to prevent child abuse and neglect? Well, we're lucky because there's been almost 50 years of research that has been done on how to help prevent child abuse and neglect, going way back to the 1960s. And that research has let us know that to prevent physical and emotional abuse, we know that these things will work. So these are evidence-based ways that we can prevent child abuse and neglect. So prevention programs can help, especially those run by nurses who might visit parents in their homes and prepare them for the birth of a new child and follow them up and support them after the birth of a new child. These things have been shown to reduce physical and emotional abuse of children, to bring the levels of abuse right down. Very successful. Strengthening families to make families the most strong unit in which the child can grow up. Strengthening families by recognising the role of fathers in particular in caring for their children, not only the mothers, but the fathers and the mothers together. Family support programs, postnatal services for new parents, and wonderfully for early childhood, high quality preschool education has been shown to be protective when people reach adulthood. There is less chance of adults physically abusing their children if they have had high quality preschool themselves as children. And of course, when there are laws that prohibit corporal punishment of children and prevent sexual abuse of children, these things give the community a very strong message that certain behaviours against children will not be tolerated. And laws can be a very strong standard setter for how children should be treated. In terms of neglect, the way that we can prevent neglect is somewhat different to how we might prevent physical and emotional abuse. For children who are being neglected, it is often the social circumstances or the structural issues in societies that can cause children to be neglected. So the things that we need to do to prevent neglect are things like providing income support to people on very low incomes, providing employment to people who are not working, providing housing for people who don't have appropriate housing in which to bring up children, or where that housing is so crowded that people don't have enough space. Drug and alcohol treatment programs can help prevent the later problems that occur, and effective services for parents who may have disability and mental health conditions. These are things that can help adults to create safe environments in which to bring up their children. For sexual abuse, the ways that we can prevent child sexual abuse from happening are different again. And the strongest of those is laws and policies that make it a crime to sexually abuse a child. Another thing that has proven to be very successful is mandatory reporting. So in many countries of the world, reporting of child abuse and neglect by professionals like you who work with children or who will work with children is a big step in bringing abuse and neglect to the attention of authorities when it might otherwise remain hidden. Criminal history checking of people who work with children has also proven to be successful in preventing adults who might sexually abuse children from getting into jobs or positions of employment where they might choose to work with children to have access to them for inappropriate purposes. School-based sexual abuse prevention programs are very successful also. We don't know that they're successful in preventing abuse, but we know they are successful in raising children's knowledge and awareness and their skills in standing up for themselves and being able to tell adults when something is making them feel unsafe. Comprehensive sex education, online safety education, and changing norms that act as drivers of sexual violence against children are also things that can help prevent abuse from happening in the first place. And this is becoming really important now that there is also online sexual abuse of children, and unfortunately from a very young age. In terms of prevention programs, I'm going to go through a few slides now that explain the effectiveness of some specific programs that can be taught in schools. So for child sexual abuse online, there are programs available that are able to teach children how to recognize when somebody might be grooming them online, or when somebody might solicit or want to exploit them online. Many of the programs now need to teach children about sexting and image-based abuse, and to teach them the consequences of those practices. And these things, of course, are mainly for adolescents. But from a very young age, we can teach children to protect themselves by teaching them that their body belongs to them and that there are public and private parts of the body, and to teach them to recognize safe and unsafe situations. We can also teach them that when they feel unsafe, they should tell a trusted adult, and teachers can be amongst those adults that can be safe people for children to tell. Sometimes teachers are the only safe adults that children have to tell, especially if their homes are not the safe places. We don't have good evaluations yet of online sexual abuse prevention programs, and many of those programs are still in the experimental phase. But there are broader digital citizenship programs. For example, you might be familiar with the DQ intelligence programs or the Common Sense Media digital safety programs that are taught to children. And these can provide children with basic information about how to set privacy settings. And also, if we as well educate parents about privacy setting and setting internet filters, we can help them understand the importance of protecting their children. However, teaching children about privacy settings alone is not going to help them to prevent grooming and solicitation. So we need to do some extra things there. And we're not quite sure yet exactly what things will be most effective. There have been programs developed, and they may be taught in some Indonesian high schools with adolescents, to reduce dating and sexual violence and to teach the norms and practices that are appropriate in different societies. There have been some systematic reviews that have looked at every study that has been done around the world on these kinds of programs. There are some programs that have been shown to be effective in Western countries. Love You Too, Safe Dates, Ending Violence, the fourth R. And some of these programs have now begun to be trialled in China and South Korea and Hong Kong, Taiwan. The studies usually measure outcomes like knowledge and attitudes, And they also can ask adolescents about perpetration and victimization, and about rape myths acceptance, because sometimes adolescents can have misunderstandings about relationships with each other. These studies have shown that overall, adolescents' knowledge can be increased, their attitudes can be made more positive, perpetration can be reduced, and so can victimization. But it depends on the quality of the program, and the programs have to reach a certain threshold of quality before we can confidently say they will be protective. In related programs, you will have programs in schools in Indonesia that aim to reduce bullying and victimization. And I include this because there is some evidence that bullying prevention programs in childhood can help prevent bullying and later emotional abuse by parents of their children. A systematic review of 65 programs, some of the best programs with common elements, such as the Orwellius bullying prevention program, No Trap, Kiva, and VISC. These programs have been designed mainly in Sweden and in the Netherlands, but have been taught in programs throughout the world, taught in schools throughout the world. These studies measure outcomes and have shown that if high quality programs are implemented, bullying can be reduced by up to 40%, but this varies by program and region. Victimization can also decrease by up to 20%, but again, it varies by program and region. Preventing child sexual abuse is something that I have and my teams have been looking at for many years. We conducted a systematic review in 2015 that looked at all the literature that had ever been published on sexual abuse prevention in schools over 40 years. We found there were 15 programs used in different countries, but the programs varied enormously in duration, from only 45 minutes right through to 8 20-minute sessions. The program elements, the programs that were most successful had the following elements. They taught children about safety rules, body ownership, so my body belongs to me. They taught children about private and public parts of the body. They taught children to distinguish safe and unsafe touches and types of secrets, because one of the weapons of a child abuser is to ask children to keep what happens secret. If children can recognize types of secrets, then they may be more confident and willing and able to tell people. These programs also help children to know who are the people that they should tell when something is happening that they're uncomfortable with or unsafe. The program formats were delivered as films or DVDs and videos or plays. Some used multimedia, some used songs and puppets and comics and books, colouring in books. So things that we would think would work with children in early childhood and elementary schools. And the teaching methods or the pedagogies that they used were things like rehearsal, so repeating things, role play, where people take different roles and try different scenarios, discussion, and the teacher providing feedback. All of these things were found to be very successful. So those are the things that we can do to prevent. When it comes to recognizing abuse and neglect in children in our classrooms, there are 3 things that we can look out for, and we call them the ABCs. The children's appearance is the first one, so what they look like, how do they appear? What is their physical body looking like? Can we see bruises on parts of their bodies where there shouldn't be bruises? We can also look for B, behavior. So what are the children telling us through their behavior? Are they misbehaving at school and there doesn't seem to be a reason? What might be wrong at home to cause the children to behave like this? And then communication. So does the child tell you something? Does the children give you clues by disclosing something that's happened? Do they tell you about something that's happened at home, something important? And when they do, we should believe them. They might tell you about something that's happened directly to them. They might say, oh, I have a friend who this has happened to. That should make us prick up our ears and listen. They might write something in a story or in a picture or draw something in a picture. They might have unexplained changes in their behavior. For example, a child who is working very hard on their academic work and suddenly becomes uninterested, very quiet, not participating in school. This might be something we need to look out for. This might be a sign that something is happening at home. If the child has poor attention or poor concentration or seems to be very hypervigilant, what we call hypervigilant, so looking out for danger cues in their environment, these are children who might be being abused at home. I'm not saying they will definitely, but these behaviours and appearances and communications should make us prick up our ears. They should make us listen and watch more carefully. To learn more about how we can recognise and report abuse and neglect, there are some really good courses around, and one of them is one that we deliver, and it's free through FutureLearn. But there are many others as well, and one is through at the top of the page here from ISPCAN, which is an international organisation dedicated to preventing child abuse and neglect. It runs free, but also some paid, but many free webinars throughout the year. The NSPCC in the United Kingdom, the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children in the United Kingdom, also runs training and evidence-based training, and is also another really good source of training, especially for school personnel. Whoops. And then there is one YouTube here that I highly recommend. It's from the USA, and it's first responders talking about very specific behaviours and things to look out for. So I recommend those trainings to you. You have to be careful when you're choosing training to use evidence-based training, because there's a lot of information out there that can be confusing. So it's always best to listen to your lecturers for what's best to go to. In terms of reporting abuse, in all parts of Australia and in many parts of the US and the UK and other countries around the world, including in China and Vietnam, it can be compulsory for people who work with children who notice that a child is being abused to report that to statutory authorities and to bring it to their attention. This reporting to authorities can be to child protection authorities, or it might be to the police, depending on the country and depending on the region. But what is important for educators to know, for any educator to know, no matter where they are, is to find out what can be reported and what must be reported, when to report it, and what type of report might be required. So, for example, is it a written report or is it a spoken report? Can you make it on the phone, or do you need to make it on the computer? how to report and who to report to. So these are all things that anybody can do, no matter what jurisdiction they're in, no matter what region they're in, no matter what town. You can find out if you are a mandatory reporter, and if you're not a mandatory reporter, and if you notice something, can you report it to somebody? Every school, I think, no matter what country they're in, should have a policy that explained what is required of teachers and student teachers to help them understand what they are required to do under law, but also under the code of conduct. So what's required of us in our behaviour towards children. All of us can attend regular professional development on recognising and reporting child abuse and neglect. And I think that teachers should do this every year, should have their knowledge refreshed every year, because to me, it can become like fire drill. It's something that's really fundamentally important to the way we do our work. Many of us will be reluctant to report abuse because we worry what will happen to the child, and we worry what will happen to the family. We worry if we've got it right. We worry if we've noticed the right things. The thing to remember is that reporting our concerns can enable some families who would not otherwise get help to get the help they need and to stop the abuse from happening. And the sooner we can stop the abuse from happening, the better the outcomes for children will be, because the longer the abuse goes on, the more harm there will be to the child, and the poorer their overall outcomes will be. So reporting concerns can actually stop the abuse from happening. It can reduce its harmful effects, and it can ensure that children have the opportunity to reach their full potential. And education is one of the ways, one of the keys to fulfilling potential. In order to respond to children then in our classrooms who we know may have been abused and neglected, it's first important for us to understand about trauma, because experiencing abuse and neglect can create a trauma response in young children, particularly, well, in any children really, and in adults as well. Understanding trauma is tricky because trauma can manifest in difficult behaviours for children that as teachers we can sometimes misunderstand. So, for example, if children are being abused, they might be feel less secure in their ability to learn. So they might come across, or they might behave in a classroom as a child who is very dependent on their teacher and very dependent on their carers, almost clingy, wanting to be with you, not sure of what they're doing. This is because abuse creates that insecurity in them and lack of secure attachment to their caregivers. Abuse or neglect, when children experience abuse and neglect at home, particularly physical violence against them at home, when they come to school, they can be aggressive and violent towards their peers because they don't know any other way to behave. At school, this then causes them to have big problems making friends with others, and over time, this develops maladaptive or malfunctioning peer relationships. So those children can be the ones who are always left out, that nobody wants to play with because they have trouble playing with others because of what they have experienced at home. When children have experienced violence at home, and that violence is prolonged and happens all the time, they can develop a lack of empathy for others. It kind of doesn't make sense, but it's been shown time and time again. So they might have actually little concern for the distress of their peers. They might have a hard heart. It seems like these children have a hard heart. They may also come across as having low frustration tolerance. So they get upset easily when something doesn't work. They might throw something, they might hit somebody, they might bite somebody, they might call somebody names. And this manifests in disruptive and antisocial behaviours in classrooms that's really hard for teachers to deal with. But it might not be the fault of the child that this is happening. It may be because something else is happening and going wrong for them. When children have grown up in conditions of neglect, where they've been left alone in their room, shut away, where they haven't been played with, when they haven't been able to play with siblings, when they've been deprived of food or clothing, they will show less flexibility, less interest in play in very early childhood. In early childhood, we often say that play is the child's work and that play is natural. When I was a young teacher and I worked with children who'd been abused or neglected, I learned that play isn't something that comes naturally to children who've been abused or neglected. Sometimes they don't know how to play. They might not know how to build in the sand. They might not know how to play in the mud. They might not know how to ask to join in play. They might never have seen a puzzle. They might never have seen toys. So these children can come across or can appear to have delays in their development, particularly in the early childhood years. They can also come across as having lower intelligence or lower cognitive competence. And because of all of these things, they may academically underachieve. Imagine if you were a child who's constantly looking out for danger in your environment, because everything you do will be designed to keep yourself safe. So you're always looking out for danger in your environment. And then picture that child in a classroom with 30 or 40 or 50 other children. And that child has to concentrate on what the teacher is saying and what their work is that they're doing. But they're constantly looking around for danger. Where is the danger coming from? They will find it very hard to concentrate and very hard to do their schoolwork. So school can become a real problem for children who've been abused or neglected. And sometimes, even though we try to make school a safe place for them, they can avoid coming to school because it's too hard, or their parents may send them out to work, so they are absent from school. They don't come to school, so they're not exposed to learning. And parents and teachers might view these behaviours of children differently. We might see them as problem behaviours when what is actually underneath the surface is abuse or neglect. What we need to know as teachers, though, is that victims and survivors of abuse and neglect have told us that they can overcome these problems, but they need our help to do so. They need us to recognise and they need us to respond. And this is the great power, I think, of teachers and educators. So there are 11 things, I think, that we can do. This is the work of Marg Downey, who is an Australian teacher who has written a lot about how to work with children who've experienced trauma. And she says that fundamentally, the best thing we can do is try to understand children and what's going on for them in the background. The second thing we need to do is manage our own reactions. When a child is misbehaving in our classroom, it can be very hard for teachers to be professional and to control our own reactions, to self-regulate. And that will be even harder for teachers who may have experienced abuse and neglect themselves. We often don't think about that, but that's possible. We can help children to comply with requests. We can provide structure and consistency. So abused and neglected children will thrive when there is a routine, when they're doing the same things every day, when it's predictable and consistent. One of the ways that in the West we've been taught to manage children's behaviour is via time out. Instead, with abused and neglected children, they need time in, because time out will be dangerous for them. They need gentle and consistent attempts to make connections with them, because they won't trust people automatically, not like children who've grown up in loving households. We should use consequences rather than punishments and offer children choices. We acknowledge good choices and decisions, and our schools, our whole school systems need to support parents and caregivers. And then, of course, we need to maintain our roles as teachers, understand our code of conduct, and maintain our professionalism. So the evidence suggests there is much that we can do to prevent child abuse and neglect from happening in the first place, to recognise it, to report it, to respond to children with kindness and openness, and to collaborate with others. Thank you. There may be some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. It's really full of information. I couldn't blink my eyes because it's really wonderful. And we have some questions here. First, our Vice Dean wants to ask a question. Dr. Pupung, he has a question for you. Please.
Sorry, Etty, I'm finding it hard to hear you, but that your colleague is clearer. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Carrie-Ann. It's a super interesting topic and issue. You know, it's about abuse in children, and you know there is some application that make to protection the children about the safety, and you know there's so many in Google Play or something like that to minimize the children abuse. But the question is how to ask people to aware about children's safety, because it's not just parents who are responsible about children's well-being, but also everybody around them. It's easy to find information about how in the internet about how to protect children or something like that, but it's a little bit hard to stimulate or ask people to aware, because children well-being is important and children are our future, you know, and we cannot turn back their childhood. And about your slide before about the trauma and something, it's really affect their future when they are going adult.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and for online, yes, the whole area of online safety of children is exploding everywhere, because the internet means that children can be abused by somebody in a different country, even nowhere near them. So some of the things, I think schools are important in this, but I actually think it starts with parents, this one, because parents often use the excuse that, oh, the children know more about the internet than I do, and they are more capable and they do all these things. But I think every parent must become familiar with the platforms that their children are using. They need to use Google Play. They need to try it. They need to try TikTok. They need to look at it. They need to be on WhatsApp. They need to work it out, and they need to know what's going on in those spaces. One of the things I think we can do as teachers is to host information sessions at our school, and now they can be done online, because it's very hard to get parents, and this will be the same in Indonesia. Parents are busy. It's very difficult to get them to come to school for an information session. So we have to find other ways of engaging with parents. And maybe that's like this on Zoom, where you have at the start of the year, in fact, every year at the start, I think it's worldwide, in early February, this is the start of the year for us in Australia, but it's not in the Northern Hemisphere. In February, there's Safer Internet Day. So with things like Safer Internet Day, we can develop a program of activities around this to help educate parents and really focus on this. We can get an expert in to talk with parents, you know, an expert on online safety who's culturally appropriate and a safe person that the school is comfortable with, and talk to parents about the things that they can do to assist their assist their kids. One of the most powerful things that parents can do in general about their children's safety, whether it's sexual safety as their kids are getting older or online safety when their children are very young, is to have a conversation in the car. So when the child is in the car with the parent isn't staring at the child going, you know, what have you been doing? When you're in the car, you are side by side, more like partners in protection. So a parent can start to ask a child about what they've been doing online. But if the parent knows enough about the platform, the parent can start to construct what we call what-if situations. So the parent can say to the child and start to play games with them. What if somebody did this? What would you do? And you let the parent lets the child tell the parent what they would do. So then the parent can take the chance to go, maybe they could do this, maybe they could do that, as long as but the parent needs to know what it is that the child needs to do. So I think the worst thing a parent can do is to get, you know, bossy with the children. They need to be partners in prevention. And the car is just such a brilliant place to do this. And what if situations can happen? It's a parenting technique that I think works on so many levels. It can work with bullying when the children are at school. It can work. So what if somebody is calling you names? What if someone, what would you do? Or so parents can make up hypothetical situations around all kinds of things. If you're in the supermarket and you get lost, what should you do? You know, anything to do with safety. When you're at home and you're at the babysitter and the babysitter asks you to watch something on TV that only adults should watch, what are you going to do? You know, and I guess part of that is the adult making themselves a safe person for the child to tell. So one of the key things that parents can say to their children is, I love you no matter what you tell me. Nothing is ever so bad or so horrible that you can't tell me about it. This is one of the most amazing things that a parent can say to a child, because then the child will tell them anything, and then they're not afraid of what the consequences will be. Often children keep things secret because they're worried about what their parents will say. They're worried about getting into trouble. They're worried someone's going to get hurt. Yeah. So yeah, I think those really practical parenting techniques can be applied to online safety. Yes, there are filters that can be used. Yes, there are privacy settings, but you can go on Google and figure out how to do privacy settings in TikTok. If you use Safer Internet Day as a way to do that, you could have an online session with parents, and the parents are on their device, and you work through, set the privacy settings now. Everyone's going to do it in the next 5 minutes. We're going to do this. So you can kind of support by providing time and providing expertise and giving parents that opportunity, I think. And then what teachers need to do in the classroom is just re-emphasize what the parents are saying. So everyone's doing the same, giving the same message. Schools will already have, some schools will already have filters in place, so children can't be searching certain search terms and so on, which is very good. and running online safety programs at school more broadly. I think, yeah, these things are really important. I hope that helps.
Thank you. But maybe there's something like taboo, in
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely, especially when it comes to anything to do with sex and sexuality and culture. This is so important, but culture does not protect you against somebody who might want to harm you, who does not respect that. It's
it's important to care and aware about that, and the discussion like a partner is the key. Thank you.
Talk early, talk often.
Thank you.
Talk early, talk often. Thank you very much. Professor Karian, can you hear my voice clearly now?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we still have some question, but before that, I would like to invite other partisipan. Bapak Ibu, bagi yang ingin bertanya, silahkan dapat mengirimkan pertanyaannya, baik dalam bahasa Inggris atau bahasa Indonesia. Saya akan bantu untuk menanyakan kepada Profesor Karian, atau mungkin mau tanya langsung, bisa menekan tombol raise hand. Nanti saya akan persilakan untuk berbicara. Nah, sambil menunggu yang lainnya untuk bertanya, saya akan membacakan. I will read 2 questions for the student. Maybe for, the first one from Rizka Imroatun Fadila. She asked about, Professor, if I want to ask about sexual education, are there certain limits when we do sexual education for children, such as what limits we should teach 5-year-old children, and what should we teach a 10-year-old child, whether it's different, and what is the limits? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like all things in education, it has to be developmentally appropriate. It has to be culturally appropriate. So yes, absolutely. You teach different things to a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, or even smaller than that. For example, we can start talking with 2- and 3-year-olds about my body belongs to me. So this helps them not only with in sex education or with sexual abuse prevention, but it also helps them with bullying, because children, they have a personal space and they have a space where they feel safe. And when other children come into that space in early childhood settings, we teach children how to kindly tell others, this is my space, I'm doing this is my space. So some of those techniques with younger children, we're not talking to 5-year-olds about the act of sexual intercourse, that's for sure. We're probably not even talking with 10-year-olds about that. But it's developmentally appropriate. So there are international guidelines for sex education that have been published by UNESCO. And these are taught around the world. So they have been through a really rigorous process of an input and consultation with people from many, many different countries and cultures, including countries where they're with the Islamic faith. And the international guidelines map out a developmental progression for how we ought to teach or introduce concepts to children over the span of their education. But yes, we begin early by talking about my body belongs to me and about safe and unsafe situations in developmentally appropriate ways. We talk about body's warning signs. So when your heart starts to beat fast, this is a warning sign. When you start to sweat, when you start to breathe heavily, when you feel butterflies in your tummy, these are body's warning signs that young children can be taught about in relation to almost anything that can then be helpful when applied to bullying prevention, sexual violence prevention later on. So yeah, through the elementary school years, we talk with children mainly about safe and unsafe situations and lots of different examples of that. That can be helpful for bullying. It can be helpful for drug and alcohol prevention as well. Different kinds of scenarios, but very broad. Once children move into puberty, that's where they need more specific education about, the sexual body parts, public and private body parts, and about relationships and what is appropriate. And all through, we can be teaching them about who are safe adults to tell. Being mindful that some children won't have safe adults to tell at home, and teachers might be the safe person that the child decides to tell when something is happening to them. So yes, and then right through to adolescence, we would be then preparing children for, appropriate dating relationships and so on as they get older. But yes, there is a big difference with how we introduce it to children in the early childhood years, through elementary, secondary, and high school.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe I want to translate it first to I will make it short to translate. Jadi pertanyaan dari Rizka terkait apa perbedaan dalam mengajarkan pendidikan seksual pada anak usia 5 tahun, 10 tahun itu menurut Profesor Kerian itu memang berbeda, sangat dibedakan karena secara mental berbeda anak usia misalnya 3 tahun dengan anak usia 10 tahun. Kemudian secara perkembangan anak juga itu akan menjadi pembeda, kemudian secara budaya juga mungkin bisa jadi pembeda. Misalnya saja pada anak 3 tahun kita lebih fokus mengajarkan tentang anggota badan. Misalnya ini badan saya, milik saya, apa yang harus saya tahu tentang ini. Kemudian ini juga berlaku untuk bullying, misalnya saat anak bermain, maka anak harus tahu ini space saya, artinya ini tempat saya, maka orang lain harus respect. Begitupun juga kalau kita melihat space yang lain, kita harus respect pada setiap anak begitu. Nah, mungkin untuk hal terkait dengan hal-hal seksual lainnya belum kita ajarkan secara detail pada anak yang usia 5 atau 3 tahun. Tetapi kalau mau lengkapnya ada guidance, ada petunjuk dari UNESCO mengajarkan tentang pengajaran pendidikan seksual secara tahapan usia, secara tahapan perkembangan. Misalnya umur sekian bagaimana, umur sekian bagaimana. Kemudian ada juga dijelaskan tentang tanda-tanda warning atau tanda-tanda bahaya yang bisa mungkin anak rasakan, misalnya dia jantungnya berdetak cepat, merasa gemetar, perutnya merasa tidak nyaman. Dan itu semua adalah bagian-bagian dari tanda bahaya. Kemudian saat masuk usia puber ya, itu berbeda lagi pengajarannya tentang hubungan, tentang bagaimana memperlakukan teman lawan jenis dan sebagainya. Jadi jelas berbeda ya Rizka ya. Well, next question, we still have questions.
Could I just add something there? The other thing I would say there is that I'm not sure about schools in Indonesia, but here in Australia, we have some partner organizations like NGOs who are experts in delivering school-based programs to kids in schools, and they come into the school and they go through and they teach each class these difficult concepts because we can't demand that every teacher feels comfortable and confident to teach this. So we have the opportunity, if it's possible, to partner with external organizations who can help us with this.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so far, I don't think we have that just like what the Australia school has, because maybe in the big city or in certain schools, they have it, but not in all schools. Jadi di Australia itu mereka punya organisasi partner yang mengajarkan isu-isu seperti ini karena mungkin saja tidak semua guru bisa memberitahu atau menjelaskan terkait dengan isu-isu seksual ini, maka mereka punya partner dengan organisasi mungkin seperti UNESCO tadi dan sebagainya. Another question, Professor Kerian, from Ira Makta. What teacher do first when they know their student is a victim of sexual abuse? How to communicate to the parents? Because many teachers here don't know how to talk to parents, especially about this case, as mentioned Vice Dean. It's a taboo question or taboo topics to discuss. Many people still don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Very good question. So if the child has told you that this is happening to them, they may or may not have identified who is the person that is doing it to them. If the person is in their family, it might not be advisable to discuss it with the parents. The report should probably go straight to police. Yeah, because sexual offences against children are a crime in every country. So it should probably go straight to the police. It might not be safe to discuss it with the parents, even for a school principal with more power. It might not be safe to discuss it with the parents. The same with very severe physical abuse, like where the child is coming to school with lots of marks and bruises or burns or cuts. Or whip marks and things like that. This should probably be reported directly to police without being discussed. Would not be necessary to discuss it with parents. The police could be the ones to discuss it with parents. When it's at a lower level, though, where you might not be sure, it might be helpful for somebody with skills. So maybe the guidance and counselling staff at the school, or maybe the principal, or maybe both, to have a meeting with the parents to explain what has been observed, and open the conversation with the parents to fill in the gaps, to explain, So the conversation would be, here are some things that we are worried about at school. Here are some of the things that we've noticed, and here is why we are worried. We would like to hear your side of the story. We would like to hear why the child might be behaving in these ways and what you think we might be able to do to help. Then the guidance counsellor and the principal or the teacher will need to figure out what to do next. And it might be at that point that a report needs to be made to the police or to child protection. But it might be that something can be done with an NGO, for example, to refer the parents for some assistance, depending on what's available in the local area. So this is why it's important at the start of the school year for schools to know what is in their local community, which are the services that might be used in future for child protection and safeguarding. Is there a Save the Children in the area? Is there a UNICEF that's working close by who could be of assistance? What counselling services might be provided to the child? And then what can the school be doing? So once it's identified, we need to then partner with other organisations to help. When the child tells us, so going back to when the child tells us that something is happening, teachers often worry, or think, could the child be making it up? Could the child be telling a little lie? It's not usual that children would lie about something that is as serious as this. And if it turns out later that the child was lying, we can deal with that later. We can deal with lying. We deal with lying all the time. What we need to do as adults when a child tells us they're being harmed is we have to believe them. We have to have the courage to believe what the child is saying. And then we need to get a team around us to help us act together. It's never up to one teacher. It's always a team that works there. I hope that helps.
Really comprehensive. I hope many teachers will have the courage. Jadi, I will translate again for the student. Jadi, pertanyaan dari Ira Magna terkait dengan bagaimana mengkomunikasikan ini dengan orang tua. Profesor Kerian memberikan beberapa jawaban, misalnya saat anak mengatakan ini, kita harus berani untuk percaya kalau anak ini mengatakan sesuatu yang jujur. Kalaupun mungkin ke depannya itu sesuatu yang tidak seperti yang dikatakan, maka kita akan lakukan hal lain. Tapi pertama kali kita harus bisa percaya, dan kita juga bisa meminta bantuan dari guru lain atau tim lain untuk membahas terkait isu ini. Kita juga bisa, misalnya ini terjadi dilakukan oleh anggota keluarga, misalnya kekerasan seksual, maka lebih baik kita langsung lapor ke polisi, atau mungkin lapor kepada layanan sekolah, misalnya guru BK atau mungkin kepala sekolah untuk membicarakan hal ini. Akan begitupun juga pada kekerasan fisik ya, misalnya kekerasan memar atau hal-hal lainnya, itu bisa langsung kita laporkan ke polisi karena ini merupakan tindakan kriminal, begitu kan. Kemudian untuk lebih paham terkait ini, kita harus tahu bantuan apa yang ada di sekitar kita, misalnya mungkin NGO atau misalnya mungkin kita punya layanan konseling atau terkait dengan servis atau layanan-layanan lain yang bisa membantu untuk mengkomunikasikan hal ini kepada keluarga ataupun bagaimana untuk melaporkan hal ini. Jadi sebagai guru yang harus kita lakukan pertama ya adalah berani untuk percaya hal ini dan bertindak terkait dengan apa yang dilaporkan oleh anak tersebut. Yes, we still have some question. Is that okay, Professor Kerian?
Yes, of course.
Okay, yes, this one from Ernawati Hussein. In big city, many babies are found who many babies they are like beg for their parents' attention because maybe they don't have that, especially related to the health of the baby itself. So what we can do to make sure that these babies have the right from the parents, maybe as related to the neglect as you mentioned, because it's a great area I think about neglect. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And again, it can be difficult to separate out what is purposeful neglect of a child or the parents are living in poverty and are not able to provide food, clothing and shelter for their children. And at the point I made earlier was that not all parents living in poverty will neglect their children or abuse them. So it's often some parents who are living in poverty will do anything to help their children thrive. It's the circumstances that need changing. So this is a really difficult one for us as educators to do anything to change, because a lot of the issues that cause neglect are structural societal issues. What we can do is advocate, though, for services, and we can make sure that we're not discriminating when children are coming into our schools, that we're not discriminating on the basis of income or other issues to do with the children having access to the schools. I guess free available early childhood services from a very young age, when parents need to go out to work, that the children can be cared for in environments that will be stimulating for them rather than leaving them alone to be neglected. And again, this is really difficult in certain countries because of the structural environmental, societal things that just seem so difficult to overcome. I think over time these things can be overcome, but it requires the will of governments, and it requires a lot more than we as teachers can provide. I think the things that we can support are to support our colleagues who are working in the nurse colleagues, for example, who work with parents and children before the birth of a new child and after the birth of a child. We can advocate for income support. When we vote as citizens, we contribute. We have a say in what happens structurally in our economy and in our society. So we must use our power wisely. But yes, I think this is a really difficult one, because we, as educators, we can do what we can do. We can play our part, but we might not be able to immediately do anything to address those structural inequalities.
Right, thank you very much, Professor Kerian. So, jadi ini pertanyaan terkait dengan neglect, atau umumnya ini terjadi karena misalnya keluarga berasal dari ekonomi lemah begitu ya, jadi kebutuhan untuk menyediakan berbagai misalnya perhatian atau berbagai fasilitas kepada anaknya itu terhambat misalnya begitu ya. Namun disarankan bahwa ini memang isu yang besar dan kita sebagai guru bisa memainkan peran kita, tetapi bagi untuk menyelesaikan kasus ini lebih baik melibatkan banyak hal begitu, pemerintah, layanan PAUD yang diberikan dan sebagainya. Jadi ini harus merupakan kerja bersama begitu. Another question is from Muhammad Aldiansa Asmoro. How can we protect ourselves from sexual things when a lot of thing is happening in some social circles, even with virtual sex around us? So what we should do, Professor Karian?
Yeah, this is a really difficult one because it's everywhere now, and it's very difficult. I think what we can do is educate ourselves and exercise self-regulation and understand. For example, pornography is widely available to anyone who would want to access it. However, what we see on pornography, and for the young people who are here, this is hard to hear, but I'll say it. What you see in pornography is not real. It does not display loving relationships between men and women. So there are power imbalances there. We need to be aware of that. And I guess if we log on to certain websites, then we are giving them our vote in many ways. We are supporting them. So by not logging on there, we are not supporting them. These are things that as individuals, when every individual does something like this, then we can have more power to make change. But it can be really difficult. It's difficult for adolescents in the West. Children as young as 9 and 10 are being exposed to pornography in the West, and this is really having a destructive influence on human relationships generally, because instead of having proper expert sex education, kids are turning to pornography for their sex education, and this is really unhealthy. But there are a lot of people, very powerful people and businesses who are benefiting from that. So I think being aware, some of that basic digital citizenship education can really help us to understand what lies behind what might seem to be a popular platform like TikTok or like WhatsApp or like a game that we might think is quite innocuous. So yeah, we just need to be aware. What we can also do is, as bystanders, not tolerate behaviour. When our friends start laughing about something that they've seen that was clearly inappropriate, we can say something like, "That's not cool," and just change the subject rather than listen to what they say. Being a bystander, if we listen and agree with what our peers say about these things, we provide tacit acceptance of it. So I think we can call out, we can be brave, we can stand up. But just by saying something like, you know, that's not cool, or that's not cool for women, or that's not cool for men, it allows us to have our voice heard and just move on. And then our peers know that, you know, we're not the person to be talking about these kinds of things. It's tough. It's really hard. It's really hard to be a young person at the moment.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Karian. So self-regulation is really important, because we are the one who control our lives, so we don't want them to destroy our relationship maybe later to other person, because this is not a real relationship, things like that. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Karian. I think you have covered the whole question that has been asked for today's, and we are really grateful to hear from you. Is that okay if I share the material to the participants, your
Of
PowerPoint?
course, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Jadi Bapak Ibu, materi akan bisa saya bagikan, nanti saya akan kirim melalui grup WhatsApp atau juga dalam link di grup di YouTube kita. So I think this is the end of our webinar, but as our Vice Dean said, that I hope this is not the end of our collaboration, because for your information that our faculty currently trying to create a policy and regulation to prevent this sexual abuse or maybe any kind of violence happens in our faculty. Yes, and
I'm
we have
pleased to
strong
hear
commitment
that.
to make it. And maybe we need more advice later on about this issue.
Yeah,
Maybe we
happy to
will
help.
discuss.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And Professor Karian, I will send you the certificate of appreciation for this today. And before we close, I would like to invite everyone to take a picture, virtual picture with Professor Karian. So, jadi Bapak Ibu, kita akan mengambil beberapa foto. Mohon bisa diaktifkan videonya. Adik-adik mahasiswa mungkin bisa diaktifkan sehingga kita bisa mengambil foto bersama Profesor Karian. Mungkin Pak Ato boleh dibantu untuk screenshot. Baik, di slide yang ada gambarnya aja ya Pak ya. Kayaknya tidak semua mengaktifkan kamera. Silakan Pak Ato. Oke. 1, 2, 3. Smile everyone. Okay. Yes, thank you. I think that's fine. Cuman satu slide ya. Ya, oke. But cuman satu yang aktifkan. Okay, maybe we have more because many participants now open their videos. So, Pak Ato silakan. Alright. Okay. Udah ya Pak? Okay, thank you. So, finally, once again, Professor Karian, thank you very much. And it's the end of our discussion. And once again, I would like thank you to our amazing speaker, Professor Karian, for the time and the knowledge and the effort, and also for all the participants in Zoom also and in YouTube. Thank you very much for your attention. I close this webinar by saying Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Goodbye everyone.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Karian.
Thank you very much, Professor. I have to visit you someday.
Yeah. Thank you and good luck everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Oke. Para peserta webinar mohon mengisi link sertifikat yang sudah diberikan. Nanti akan dikirimkan sertifikat ke email masing-masing. Dan terima kasih atas partisipasinya. Jadi webinar hari ini kita tutup ya. Di YouTube.